Yeah, thank you. May I request the speakers to move out? We will start off with the next session. Sorry. We have the auto components session. I'm happy to invite the session chair, Dr. Sanjay Chadha, who is the managing director at Canada in India. And Mr. Chadha has over 37 years of industrial experience and has worked across the globe prominently in North America, Mexico, Brazil, Europe, and Belgium. Experienced in turning around business in several countries, including USA, he served in different roles across the globe and also Motherson Sumi Systems Limited. He also took positions in Clean India, Gabriel India, and he also has an honorary doctorate degree in business. He's a management graduate, strategic head, who has brought many innovative reforms into the business. With this introduction, I'm happy to hand over this to Mr. Sanjay Chadha.
Thank you, Sujata. So I think most of the people are just walking in, but welcome and good afternoon to everyone. So I'm very happy to introduce a very eminent panel of experts we have gathered today and share their rich experience and knowledge with all of us. So I'd like to introduce one by one. I have Mr. Amit Dakshini. He's the director of Pricewater PwC. So Dakshini is a graduate from FMS Delhi MBA. He has about 26 years experience and he has worked in various companies. Of course, last 4 years in PwC, and then he's worked in Precol and Veroc in various senior management positions. So welcome. Thank you. And I have Dr. Brad Storia. He is my colleague from US. Is Brad, are you on? I don't know. He's on? Brad, but can he connect him? Speakers are connected or no? Hello? Hello, Brad. Zoom phone is some. Hello. Can you hear me, Brad? I was talking in the session. We can't hear you. On the phone, not on the speaker. Is not coming, Brad. Not on the speaker. Oh, I see your name now on the screen. If you turn on your camera. I can hear you on the phone. What I can do is I can put you on the speaker phone and maybe you can share with people.
It shows that my phone's working fine on Zoom.
Okay, we'll try to figure out, but let me introduce Brad. So Brad is our CTO at Standine Global for the global operations. Brad has a very rich experience as a doctorate in engine technology, emissions, and fuel injection. So he's worked a long number of years at Cummins, and where he looked after all the new technologies and various other experiences. So very, very experienced, very well respected. He's also working with several programs with the US government on introduction of hydrogen technology in the fuel injection system. So we would be very interesting to hear his experiences and viewpoints, because he is at the cutting edge of all the new technologies which are developing in the world. So, yeah. Okay. So then I have Mr. Venkatramaya. Mr. Venkatramaya is from Federal Mughal Motor Parts. Mr. Venkatramaya has a 35-year experience, BTech and MBA, and he has worked with Rane, Federal Mughal, and is a director with P&L responsibility. So welcome, sir. Very long experience. And I'm also very pleased to introduce Mr. Ravi Shankar. He's a joint managing director, Super Auto Forge, although we are a little bit rivals at the college level. So Ohio State versus Michigan. Blue versus greens. But welcome, sir. Very nice to have you. He has very rich experience. And Super Auto Forge is the second generation of entrepreneurs. So welcome, sir. So with this, I would like to invite Mr. Amit for taking us through his presentations and sharing his viewpoints on the status of auto and auto component industry. So this session, I'm trying to keep the focus on more on the carbon reduction and carbon footprint reduction for the auto component industry. So I think after Amit, we will look at various ways how we are trying to achieve, both on the emission side, engine side, as well as what we are trying to do on the component side, manufacturing side, component manufacturing, design of components. So we'll hear all the experts on that. Thank you.
This will work.
Phone. I'm on Teams. I am on Teams. Can you hear me on Teams?
Yes, we can hear you now on Teams. Yes.
Oh, okay. So Sanjay, I'll get off the phone.
Yes. Okay.
I'll log off the phone.
Can you call the IT person? Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to this session on the auto component space. My name is Amit Dakshni, and for the next 15-20 minutes I will be speaking on the state of the auto component industry and very briefly touching upon the auto industry per se in India. My focus is not so much on the numbers today, but really talk about the emerging opportunities for the component suppliers in India from different perspective, given the way the industry has been evolving. While my presentation gets loaded, as you all know that this industry is at the cusp of change and transformation at such a way that something which has not happened for almost 100 years in this industry. And with the evolution of whether we talk about electric mobility driven by all the emission norms and all the environmental policies of different governments and countries, or the usage of more electronics and software in the vehicles, and today we talk about software defined vehicles, which is a completely different level, or talk about the connected architectures using telematics as a base technology and then using more connected features to look at the life cycle of a consumer in terms of the journey that he's going through with the ownership. or finally talk about the autonomous vehicles or ADAS systems. So if you look at all these four things, for some reason they have converged together in the last 8-10 years, and that has created the disruption which has never happened for the last 100 years or so. So very clearly this has led to a lot of opportunities for the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers, including the specifics in terms of ICE engines as well, where we talk about more on lightweighting technologies, etc. So, well, I'm still waiting. What should we do? That's not my presentation. I can continue, but what should I present? Okay. Let me verbalize some of the data points that I have in terms of the auto industry. I think if you look at the FY 22 to 23, overall the industry has grown in terms of overall production by 16%. Where if you look at segment by segment, two-wheelers have grown by 13%, passenger cars, very fast growth of almost 30%, so is commercial vehicles, tractors around 6%, and three-wheelers around 15%. So overall blended growth of the industry has been close to 16% over the last year. If you look at exports in terms of growth again, large part of the growth has come from the PASCAR business, which is around 16%. But exports for two-wheelers, commercial vehicles, tractors, three-wheelers have actually gone down over the last year. So on an overall basis, we have seen the decline of nearly 10% in terms of exports of vehicles from the Indian market. Before going into more details here, there are few things that I wanted to actually present were more related to the Indian economy in general. So as we know that by 2030 there is a projected view of the Indian economy that we will be close to 8.5 trillion economy, which will take us to fourth position in the world in terms of the size of the economy for India, which is largely driven by 4 or 5 factors. First one is the growth in private consumption and capital formation. Second is the demographic shifts, which is leading to a very high number of middle income households, which is going to be close to 300 million in numbers in the next 8 to 10 years. 60% of the population will be under the eligible workforce by 2030, and the urbanization will contribute to roughly 70% of the GDP in the next 8 years. So these demographic shifts will contribute significantly. As I said, private consumption, which is the largest factor for a country like India, contributes roughly 60% of the GDP growth in India, unlike many other economies where exports, and foreign trade contributes larger portion of the GDP. In case of India, 60% is private consumption, which is local consumption, and that is going to be close to 4.8 trillion by 2030, which is roughly 2.5 times of where we stand today. There is going to be growth in infrastructure and industrial sector, which is going to contribute roughly 6% of the overall contribution to the GDP. And PLI linked schemes which have been launched recently and the investments are going on, by 2030 those schemes will start to add close to 2% to the GDP on an overall basis. And the merchandise exports is expected to be around $1 trillion from India by 2030. So these are very, very significant numbers. Is it visible? Okay, fantastic. So yeah, I was actually talking through this slide where I said that the Indian economy will become close to $8 trillion by 2030. And lastly, there is a formalization of the Indian economy with all these technologies playing a very critical role. Like the UPI transactions are expected to be $4 trillion by 2025, and tax to GDP ratio, which is one of the very significant contributor to GDP, will be up around 20% of by 2030, which is again a very significant jump in terms of the numbers. The last part is the flourishing startup ecosystem, and we expect that close to 2 million new jobs will get created by 2025 just because of the flourishing startup ecosystem, which will further add to the private consumption. And then this will also lead to more IPOs being introduced in India and leading to higher wealth creation overall. Moving on to the next section, this was a survey done. It's actually an annual survey we do with the CEOs across sectors, not just auto. And very clearly, if you look at the capital formation and consumption growth, as well as the confidence of the CEOs in the economy going forward, there is a very direct correlation, and that's what we wanted to highlight. So India is absolutely on the growth path, which has significant impact on the automotive industry, and the reason is that as we speak now, currently it's roughly 9 to 10% of the GDP's contribution comes from the automotive sector as a whole. So on an 8 trillion economy, you can estimate the size of the auto industry that's going to be there. One of the questions that's always been asked by large leaders in India and outside of India, especially outside of India, OEMs who have been talking to us, and one question is this growth sustainable in India? How is it different from last 10, 20 years that you're seeing? Because every time there is a commitment to investment, but the results are not there. So we have tried to capture that in one slide to explain why this growth is more sustainable. Number one is that there is more stability in the governance as far as the central government is concerned, and we expect that to continue going forward. The speed of execution of the policies has been absolutely at a different track and path, and that has led to significant changes in the overall infrastructure and economy. And few examples here have been the way the national highways have been constructed, the GST collection and the implementation of GST as a regime. What happened, we all know. The other key point is the overall approach to the change. So some data points here is like if you look at the number of trade agreements which have been signed in the last few years and what has happened over the last 20, 30 years, you can see the critical change that has happened, the speed at which the government has moved. Also the ecosystem approach, it's more inclusive growth, with investments on PLI, etc., and with more involvement of rural economy in general, the growth is more sustainable and more inclusive. And also the fact that there has been more policy laid out for a longer time durations, and the investments are falling in those specific directions, clearly indicate that the growth in India is going to be highly sustainable this time. Looking at a shorter view on FY24, this is PwC's in-house view on what's going to happen in FY24 across the vehicle segments. So if you look at domestic sales on PES cars is expected to be around 8 to 9%, two-wheelers should grow 10 to 12%, three-wheelers around 7%, commercial vehicle again between 8 to 10%, and tractors around 4 to 7%. So this is based on certain models that PwC uses to establish growth over the long-term period, but this is just an indicative numbers for next year. So overall, the market is growing, and it's basically creating a lot more opportunities for the component suppliers. So where are these opportunities emerging? And I just wanted to touch base on this as a hypothesis in terms of where these opportunities will create larger revenue pool and profit pool for Indian auto component suppliers. The first one is the addition of new content from emerging technologies will bring technology scouting and technology holders to the forefront. So the need to work with the startup communities with more innovative models is something which will play a very important role, and that is something I've been talking about in multiple forums, that embracing innovation and working with startups is something you cannot avoid today if you have to sustain new technology adoption into your product line. Stringent emission norms, electrification will create more opportunities for lightweighting, which I think is very evident from the fact that CAFE norms have a stringent targets, CAFE 2, then we are looking at CAFE 3, and then along the line of Euro 7, Bharat 7 norms are expected to be launched around the same timeline, which is around 2025 or latest by 2027, which means that lot more work on the ICE side will continue to happen, leading to one of the factors would be basically focusing on the lightweighting technologies. Localization of the electrical EV systems, EV architectures will continue to gain momentum. Software stack, I think we speak about a lot about what's going to happen on the software and the software defined vehicles. So there are choices to be made there. Either you become a differentiator supplier using software as a technology and bring more embedded electronics and software, or you start to provide software as a service to the industry in general, or become a full service software supplier. I think both paths are available to the tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers. It's the choice that companies need to make. The other dimension as an opportunity is that with more and more IPOs focusing on India and looking at India as a China plus one alternate strategy, the volume expectation from India in terms of their own procurement requirement is likely to grow 200-300 times, and that is something which has been validated by the conversations we had with many IPOs in India, and they are all looking at growing at least 2x, 3x of their current volumes, which especially for the tier 2 suppliers in the components like casting, forging, machining, rubber components, extrusion parts, these components, there is a big opportunity to be captured working with the IPOs. There are around 60-70 IPOs already set up in India. And lastly, I think, which is Sanjay mentioned about the larger conversation today around the sustainability and ESG as an area, and how do you look at carbon footprint. Basically, as we look at all OEMs and all large tier 1 suppliers would be looking at going into the supply chain, extended supply chain for in terms of the sustainability matrices and announcement of those and disclosure of those ratings as part of their agenda, and also as part of their selection criteria for looking at the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers to supply them in future. So with these specific areas, we believe that it will create a lot of opportunities going forward, and it's up to the OEMs and suppliers to work together and leverage these opportunities. So I think with that, I wanted to just conclude. It's a short presentation, and I hope I'm happy to take any further questions on this.
I suggest we'll take questions together after everybody's through.
Sure.
Thank you, Amit. Very insightful and very informative. I think Indian auto component industry has great potential in the coming years. So that brings us to the next aspect. Automotive industry is at the forefront of social pressures and government pressures on account of the emission reduction. So somehow the impression is that it's a polluting industry, which is, we don't agree to that, but that is the general perception, and all kind of legislative activities are done to curb the pollution, especially at the vehicle level. So it is very interesting that auto components also play a large part in reducing the emission. Of course, I come from an industry which is directly into fuel injection system manufacturing. So with this, I would like to invite Dr. Brad Storia, and he can throw some more light on what is being done worldwide for the carbon reduction and the emission reduction at the vehicle level, at the engine level. So Brad, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Sanjay?
Yes, we can hear you, Brad. Please continue.
Very good. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for the introduction earlier. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk about carbon neutrality, but I'm going to talk mainly around technologies that would be required to achieve carbon neutrality, and I'll try to couch some of the topics towards the India market. In the past, when I presented this, it was really global, and you'll see that. But I'll try to bring up items on the Indian market, in the automobile market, when I go through the presentation. Can you see the next slide? I'm just confirming.
No. Yes.
Hopefully you can.
Yeah, it's coming.
Hang on.
Yeah, it's
Hang on
coming
one
now.
second. It's in a. Let me fix it. This is automatically going. I apologize. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, Brad.
Are the slides satisfactory? I want to make sure you can see the slides.
Yeah, we can see that. You can make it slightly bigger, if possible. I think it's a little bit too big. Yeah, that's perfect.
There we go. I apologize. Through the automatic progression. Let me start on this slide. So when you look at the transportation on a global sense, the transportation portion of emission globally, it's about 14%. And that's been at that rate and growing over the last several years. And if you look at of that 14%, about 60% of that on a global scale is for passenger cars and trucks. And that's also growing. When you look at that level of automobiles on a global scale, and I'd like to draw your eye down towards the lower left-hand side of the chart. About 97% of those vehicles today are internal combustion engines.
Hello, Brad.
Yes.
Can you hold for a few minutes? We'll try to put your presentation on a laptop, which will be more clear. And then maybe you can turn off that and speak, and then tell us to change to the next slide. It'll be more visible here to everybody.
Okay, that is fine. Just let me know.
Yeah, just give us 1 or 2 minutes. He'll put it. Sorry, everyone. Sometimes technology also plays a surprise.
Yeah.
We have
I am on slides.
Yeah. No, Brad, we'll put it. We have your presentation on the laptop. We'll just attach it. We'll just project on the screen.
Can you see it on the screen yet?
Yeah.
I'm on slide 3.
No. You turn off your screen sharing. Just speak, and then we will put it on the laptop here.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Move by some 2 slides.
move to slide number 3. So we'll go to slide number 3.
Yep. Give me 1 second here.
And then you can give us a cue when to change the slide. And then we'll change the slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are on slide number 3, which is much better now. Oh,
Do I have to turn my screen share off?
yeah. Okay, just go back slide number 3. How do you turn off this auto transition?
I
It's built into the presentation. Any expert on PowerPoint here? Yeah, but visibility is much better. I was not able to read any figure on that. Auto run you disable. What happened to the AC? Go back one slide number 3. Okay, Brad, we are on slide number 3. You can speak now. Hello? Hello, Brad?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, you are on slide number 3. Just go back. Go back slide number 3.
I am on slide number 3. But you can see my slide number 3?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So I'll just tell you when to progress the slides. Thank you. That's fine.
Yeah. Go out of presentation mode and just show like that. So then you can manually change the slide. Probably will be better.
Can you?
Yes, slide number 3. You can speak, Brad. Go ahead, Brad.
Slide number 3?
Yeah.
Can you see slide number 3?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so slide number 3, if you look in the lower left hand where it says today, about 97% of the vehicles are internal combustion engines. 3% are, say, electrified and growing. And that number on a global scale is probably on the order of maybe 5 or 6%. In India, it's roughly about 2% and growing. The vertex of this chart, you can see the vertex. This is if you look at the blue portion of that chart, you can see how it increases to 2050. In the upper range, in the future, let me explain that chart. I've taken that, and that chart is really divided up by low load, high load applications, which is on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, it's urban or city all the way up to long range. And I group that into easy to electrify in the lower left-hand corner, all the way up to hard to electrify in the upper right-hand corner. But if you notice, those sections are fuzzy. In fact, the middle is hybrid. You can add maybe a third axis here, and I'll just talk you through it. If you look in markets that are congested markets, I would call them congested urban markets, and Indian markets fit in that category. Well, then the easy to electrify starts to pursue up into the upper right-hand corner, and in fact, you can find applications even with heavy-duty truck and industrial applications and non-road applications that are electrified, primarily because you want to keep the emissions out of the congested urban areas, and you'd like to put them in a non-congested area or just eliminate them altogether. The solutions required to achieve carbon neutrality in that type of map, they range, say, from a battery electric, easy to electrify, up to a hard to electrify application that might need some other type of technology to have carbon neutrality. And I'll talk through that. But it's really driven by market, it's driven by consumer acceptance, it's driven by technology acceptance, and in some cases infrastructure, and that varies from location to location. Can you go to slide 4, please? Can you see slide 4?
Yes, we are on slide 4.
Good. So a little closer look at battery electric. I'll talk a little bit about battery electric, and you can see on this chart, this is the BNEF chart, you can see battery electric, it penetrates to almost 40%. You've heard 30% by 2050, 2040. It's growing. And I think we're discovering how the battery electric applications are being accepted. I think it's being paced both by consumer and market and economics, but also, of course, by infrastructure. I think India has a tremendous capability for infrastructure in terms of, say, the ability to develop infrastructure, not just for battery electric and charging and green energy, but also for some of the other technologies such as, say, hydrogen that are needed by the industries and the heavy duty markets. But the main takeaway from this slide, it's growing. It'll continue to grow. You can go to slide 5. If you look at how do we get power today, and in India, a lot of the power is done with fossil fuel and, in fact, coal. And coal on this chart in the upper left-hand corner is the gray portion. But if you were to look at today, renewables, they're roughly 20%, 25% of the total power generation today. But if you forecast and predict where we think that the energy generation is going to be in 2050, for instance, it essentially flips. 20% in 2050 will be fossil fuel based, but 80% will be renewable based or green energy. And that's a forecast that, of course, varies across the globe, but you can see those motive trends taking place right now as we develop the green technologies and the green power generation means. It's hard to see, but if you look in the lower left-hand corner, way down at the bottom, the per capita electricity consumption is very small for India, because India, with 1.4 billion people, you have a lot of people, but you still require energy, and the energy demand by any society will not decrease. It will always increase. That's just how our society is operated over centuries. Next slide. Today, we're roughly about if you use exajoules as the unit, we're as a society, a global society, we're using about 450 exajoules of energy. As we go through all the way up to 2050, it's expected that we'll just increase energy use up to as high as 750 exajoules or even higher. And these are forecasted, of course. When we do that, we still want to maintain sustainability. If we did that with fossil fuel, we're not going to be sustainable, because we're just going to use up fossil fuel. To be sustainable, we have to develop the technologies for both e-fuels and also green technologies such as electricity and hydrogen. And hydrogen is heavily dependent on electricity if you use it, say, for a non-fossil fuel production stream, meaning that you would use a green stream coming off, say, electrolyzers and things like that. And I think, for instance, on hydrogen, electrolyzers are needed to produce the hydrogen. At scale, I think the Indian market has a tremendous capability to be able to produce electrolyzer product space to bring the cost of hydrogen down. Hydrogen right now is approximately $5 per kilogram. At scale, it's predicted if you can get the value streams down by scale, in India especially, you could get it down into sub $3, maybe even $2. I think the goal would be maybe to get hydrogen down by maybe $2.5 by maybe 2030. That would be a good start. But I think India has a tremendous capability for a electrolyzer market, because that technology is a fairly scalable market and it'll be needed. Next slide, please. A little bit more about that. If you look at what will be used for mobility in the future, and this is an IE report that was presented at Society of Automotive Engineers last year. If you look at today, the big red portion of that curve is fossil fuels and a little bit of renewable. But if you look at 2050, you can see there's a large portion of fuel that are renewable fuels, hybrid applications to bridge the technology from today internal combustion engine up to a renewable fuel or a battery electric application, and then hydrogen as a renewable fuel, even for mobility. That's either through a fuel cell application, and in fact now you've seen and will continue to see trying to bridge the gap with internal combustion engines, with hydrogen being combusted in internal combustion engines. But a large portion of that energy demand, sustainable energy demand in 2050 is predicted to be about 70% in 2050, and directionally we are moving in that direction with the incentives by governments and the incentives to develop the infrastructure. For instance, in North America, we have hydrogen hubs that we're developing to be able to build the infrastructure out. And I think as we go through, I mean, the Infrastructure Act was very good in North America, but the issue with the Infrastructure Act in North America, that's for North America. If we share that same type of mentality through other means on a global scale to help out the developing countries, we can still have the same benefit of these, say, government subsidies to develop this. I think my opinion, we need probably 20 years, 30 years of help to develop the technology to build the infrastructure. It's a tremendous effort to build the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now I want to change the discussion a little bit to how do we decarbonize now, if you want to have a quick decarbonization now. So if you want to go towards a carbon neutral now, how do you do that? And what that would essentially is, you use the technologies you have today. For instance, on motive technology, we have engines. 97% of our mobility and even the use of power is on engines in terms of on-highway and industrial applications. India is the largest tractor market on the face of the earth. You're the second largest market for buses. You're the third largest market for heavy-duty truck. If you look at the graph on the left, those yellow bars show the immediate benefit of CO2 emission reduction if you use these renewable fuels. And I show all the way from a biofuel all the way to hydrogen to the right-hand side, baseline on a traditional, say, diesel fuel. A lot of research and a lot of technology that's ongoing for using alcohol fuels. These are what we would call low-C fuels, synthetic fuels, natural gases, ammonia is an energy carrier that doesn't have a carbon molecule in it, okay? And that can be used for a lot of different applications, primarily for marine and even rail. And then hydrogen, of course, a lot of activity on hydrogen because the abundance of hydrogen. And when you look at fuels, and you might, if I just talk a little bit about battery electric, say, versus hydrogen, or battery electric versus a renewable fuel, for that matter, I think of it as in three different categories, in three different segments. We all talk about greenhouse gas. We all talk about emissions, CO2 emissions. We've had the World Conference, COP26, COP27, and where we talk about these things. But really, when you stand back and you look at it, it's really the responsible and sustainable use of our natural resources. We really need to consider all of that. So if you look at how do we compare technologies for carbon neutral society, it's more than just what we put in the air. It's also, on the other extreme, it's how we use our natural resources. For instance, if we use battery technology, it requires elements that are mined from the earth, and these elements are in certain portions of the globe. They're not everywhere, and to get those elements out of the earth, we have to do damaging things to the earth. We have strip mines. We have all sorts of industrial means for the heavy equipment that are not green fuel based, for instance, as they're putting emissions back into the air. So think of it that way. But the third category is also the complexity. Today, 97% of our market for mobility is driven by internal combustion engines. We cannot just stop the gears turning on engines. We have manufacturing already set up. We have supply streams set up. And it'll take time to realign the supply streams and the supply to the new technologies required. So if you use a green fuel, or if you use a low C fuel or zero carbon fuel, you can make these performance tech quicker and give you time to develop the infrastructure and these other technologies required for the future. Next slide, please. And again, so if you look at the alternate fuel today, it's roughly 7% of global consumption in 2014. And by 2035, that should almost double, actually more than double. It has a trend of growing. Biofuels is really getting a lot of traction in heavy duty applications, both on highway and off highway. And hydrogen also is going to continue to grow in use as we develop the technologies to get hydrogen at a value stream and a price point, a cost point that's drives some of the technology growth. Next slide, please. If I talk a little bit about Europe, Europe is interesting because Europe is a very mobile society. And usually you see what I would call first trends in new technology in Europe. If you look on the left-hand side, 2021, to the right-hand side, 2022, and that is only 1 year, you can see the pieces of the pie or the segments for engines are shrinking, but the segments for electrified product are growing. And it'll continue to do that as the technology is being developed. Also, Europe, primarily through efforts through Germany, they've allowed the use of e-fuels beyond 2035 to give more time to develop these electrified technologies and other green technologies in Europe, because they realize you just can't put chargers in every driveway. It takes time to do that. Next slide, please. I talked a little about hydrogen. Hydrogen's interesting. So a lot of hydrogen, a lot of it's concentrated in Europe, showing up in China, showing up in North America, and also showing up in India. You can see in India, India has one dot. And that's that chart is probably a year old. Where does hydrogen expected to be used in India? If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can see most of the hydrogen will be used in industry, but the transport section is growing, and then power is also growing. And then there's a table showing that for the most part, light duty and low range, low energy use applications will be battery electric or fuel cell driven. Hydrogen shows up in long haul, high range, high energy applications. These would be long transport on highway, and also industrial applications. And that's where you see the technology governments and the incentives to develop the infrastructure. For instance, in North America, we have hydrogen hubs that we're developing to be able to build the infrastructure out. And I think as we go through, I mean, the Infrastructure Act was very good in North America, but the issue with the Infrastructure Act in North America, that's for North America. If we share that same type of mentality through other means on a global scale, to help out the developing countries, we can still, have the same benefit of these, say, government subsidies to develop this. I think my opinion, we need probably 20 years, 30 years of help to develop the technology to build the infrastructure. It's a tremendous effort to build the infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now I want to change the discussion a little bit to how do we decarbonize now? If you want to have a quick decarbonization now, so if you want to go towards a carbon neutral now, how do you do that? And what that would essentially is, you use the technologies you have today. For instance, on motive technology, we have engines. 97% of our mobility and even the use of power is on engines in terms of on-highway and industrial applications. India is the largest tractor market on the face of the earth. You're the second largest market for buses. You're the third largest market for heavy-duty truck. If you look at the graph on the left, those yellow bars show the immediate benefit of CO2 emission reduction if you use these renewable fuels. And I show all the way from a biofuel all the way to hydrogen to the right-hand side, baseline on a traditional, say, diesel fuel. A lot of research and a lot of technology that's ongoing for using alcohol fuels. These are what we would call low-C fuels, synthetic fuels, natural gases. Ammonia is an energy carrier that doesn't have a carbon molecule in it, okay? And that can be used for a lot of different applications, primarily for marine and even rail. And then hydrogen, of course, a lot of activity on hydrogen because the abundance of hydrogen. And when you look at fuels, and you might, if I just talk a little bit about battery electric, say, versus hydrogen, or battery electric versus a renewable fuel, for that matter, I think of it as in three different categories, in three different segments. We all talk about greenhouse gas. We all talk about emissions, CO2 emissions. We've had the World Conference, COP26, COP27, and where we talk about these things. But really, when you stand back and you look at it, it's really the responsible and sustainable use of our natural resources. We really need to consider all of that. So if you look at how do we compare technologies for a carbon neutral society, it's more than just what we put in the air. It's also, on the other extreme, is how we use our natural resources. For instance, if we use battery technology, it requires elements that are mined from the earth, and these elements are in certain portions of the globe. They're not everywhere, and to get those elements out of the earth, we have to do damaging things to the earth. We have strip mines. We have all sorts of industrial means for the heavy equipment that are not green fuel based, for instance, as they're putting emissions back into the air. So think of it that way. But the third category is also the complexity. Today, 97% of our market for mobility is driven by internal combustion engines. We cannot just stop the gears turning on engines. We have manufacturing already set up. We have supply streams set up. And it'll take time to realign the supply streams and the supply to the new technologies required. So if you use a green fuel, or if you use a low-C fuel or zero carbon fuel, you can make these performance tech quicker and give you time to develop the infrastructure and these other technologies required for the future. Next slide, please. And again, so if you look at the alternate fuel today, it's roughly 7% of global consumption in 2014. And by 2035, that should almost double, actually more than double. It has a trend of growing. Biofuels is really getting a lot of traction in heavy duty applications, both on highway and off highway. And hydrogen also is going to continue to grow in use as we develop the technologies to get hydrogen at a a value stream and a price point, a cost point that's drives some of the technology growth. Next slide, please. If I talk a little bit about Europe, Europe is interesting because Europe is a very mobile society. And usually you see what I would call first trends in new technology in Europe. If you look on the left-hand side, 2021, to the right-hand side, 2022, and that is only 1 year, you can see the pieces of the pie or the segments for engines are shrinking, but the segments for electrified product are growing. And it'll continue to do that as the technology is being developed. Also, Europe, primarily through efforts through Germany, they've allowed the use of e-fuels beyond 2035 to give more time to develop these electrified technologies and other green technologies in Europe, because they realize you just can't put chargers in every driveway. It takes time to do that. Next slide, please. I talked a little about hydrogen. Hydrogen's interesting. So a lot of hydrogen, a lot of it's concentrated in Europe, showing up in China, showing up in North America, and also showing up in India. And you can see in India, India has one dot, and that's that chart is probably a year old. Where does hydrogen expected to be used in India? If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you can see most of the hydrogen will be used in industry, but the transport section is growing, and then power is also growing. And then there's a table showing that for the most part, light duty and low range, low energy use applications will be battery electric or fuel cell driven. Hydrogen shows up in long haul, high range, high energy applications. These would be long transport on highway, and also industrial applications. And that's where you see the technology. So if you look at manufacturing and how do we make the change to get to carbon neutrality in manufacturing, if you look on the left, you have voice of the customer, voice of the market, voice of the technology. That's what's really driving what products are needed to make this change to a carbon neutral society. If you look at those requirements, they're typically grouped into 4 groups: efficiency, performance, size, and weight. And those all have to be optimized to get to a carbon neutral society. Cost of course, is always a major characteristic, but also efficiency is too. But also use of our natural resources, and also how the complexity of our product. If you look at product today, product's getting more modular. Product is using materials that say are lighter. They're more recyclable. They might be smaller. And these are required, by the OEs to meet this carbon neutral, because to get to that level of carbon neutrality, you really have to look, like I mentioned before, at your product at every single part and every single feature in that part. If you optimize that, you have modular design of the product, you have modular manufacturing of the product, you can continue to optimize your supply streams into that product to support a carbon neutrality production stream. And these, we call this modular product, modular strategy. It also is by nature is scalable when you do a modular type of strategy. Next slide, please. This slide has a lot on it, but just if you look on the right-hand side, a lot of product, or how would I say, components go into, and I'm using a fuel system example on a propulsion technology. A lot of parts and product goes into even a fuel system, and those all have to be optimized in terms of, say, a very robust, resilient supply stream. It'll continue to grow as the technology changes. I list in the table hard to electrify type of fuel system technologies that will take on a green fuel or a low C fuel, and even hydrogen. All the way to the right are electrified technologies. And so you might have technologies that would electrifying, say, components that might be driven mechanically or might be driven by other means. You'd electrify them now for electrified applications, and then hybrid in between to be able to support the hybrid application. So one good way to develop this and speed up this development is very close interaction and collaboration with supply chains to ensure that you have the right agility and resilience to be able to do that. Next slide, please. Summary, and this is really essentially everything that I just mentioned. I mean, the transportation sector is about 14% and growing. There's no one best carbon neutral solution. I think the goal is to try to reach a carbon neutrality, but it depends on many factors, and there really should be no one solution. But I think we know enough today that we see that we need to develop infrastructures. We need help from both intermarkets in your region of the globe, but you also need trade to be able to develop markets on a global sense, because that helps everybody. Battery electric are growing, renewable power gen is growing, fuels are also growing. And then the renewable fuels can actually provide a quick performance step to the technology we have today by using renewable fuels on these engines that we have today while we build up the new technologies required, say, for fuel cell, battery electric, and others. And then the supply chain portion of it, I mentioned that you need to really develop the supply chain. Step back a little bit. Think about how the supply chain needs to be more agile and resilient to these disruptions, or just change. There are things we can do in supply chains in terms of digitizing the supply chain, working very close with throughout the supply chain to have close collaboration, to be able to have these digital tools to be able to detect, say, what I would call slight trends, and then disruptive trends that we can course correct as needed. And then as we design products in the future, the modularity of the design, the compactness of the design, the simplicity of the design, take the streams all the way, say, from the initial requirements capture down to the, you're producing the product. Those cycles, I think the days of having 5-year, 10-year cycles are gone. That stream really needs to change from, say, a linear stream to a circular stream. So you can even have manufacturing and research and development talking early. You can have your suppliers talking early as part of the creation design process to build a product that meets these new requirements required from the technology. So thank you for giving me the time to talk. I appreciate it. And I look forward to questions if you have any questions on what I presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. So I request if you can just stay on, and we have 2 more speakers, and then we can take some questions after that. So
Sure.
Very interesting insight into how the future of fueling and how the technology is going to shape. I think we heard about the session in the electric vehicles, but this is not only the battery. Hydrogen is going to play a major role also, we feel, at the global scale, and there are things which are coming up. Just for everybody's information, Dr. Brad Storia is working in a consortium with John Deere, Cummins, and Clearflame, which is funded by the US government, and they've already launched it on the big heavy trucks, hydrogen powered trucks. So that is something, a new technology which is developing. Eventually it will come to Cummins India and Indian truck market also. Very interesting. So I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Venkatramaya. So now one aspect of the carbon neutralization we saw more on the fueling and the engine side. So he will touch base more on the manufacturing and the production side and the design side of the product.
Good afternoon and good evening. I don't take much time. Thanks to IACC for this opportunity to talk to the forum. We are into manufacturing the braking products. We are a part of Tenneco Group, and as a part of the global strategy, we have also taken the carbon neutrality and carbon footprint reduction as a strategic initiative. for each of our manufacturing locations. I would say that the achievement of goals is as expected, and we are on right way. You can see some of the numbers. Just want to touch base how we are going to reduce the carbon footprint in industry. There are three areas to this. The first one is the core, the manufacturing of the specific company. The second one is its immediate supply chain and resources being used like the power source and other things. The third one is the bigger one, the logistics. Many of the companies, or at least my experience, is the first two we are able to penetrate and do a good job on reducing the carbon footprint and the greenhouse emissions reduction. The third one is still the data itself. Getting the data itself is a tough challenge, and I'm sure that the same challenge is there for all the industries. I can walk through some of the numbers and explain what we have achieved in the last 2 years. You can look at the numbers. The first approach what we have taken is design to value. So here what is the input weight reduction of the components and usage of materials. It's totally a new technology which we have opened and progressing very well on this. The usage of organic and non-asbestos materials for developing the brake linings and pads so that we are more environment friendly. And this is a global initiative in which we are also a part from Chennai. Eco-certification of all our products from the American authorizing agencies to cater to the local as well as global markets. And as I was mentioning, reduction of input weight. The last 2 years efforts in the products is about 15%, which is significant in number. On the process side, I would say that these are process efficiency measures. The reduction of energy required by 11% and water consumption by 13%. More of grey water usage in the industry. And the total reduction of greenhouse gases by 21%. These are our global numbers. And we have also started working with our suppliers on the energy efficiency audits. And some of the smaller initiatives like the entry check of emission compliant vehicles and all these things. The other initiative as a part of the Indian government, this one which we have also complied, is the captive power generations are fitted with emission controls, 70% reduction in NOx and particulate matter. So these are the initiatives which are taken by our company, and we have the confidence that the global KPI, which is given, key performance indicator, which is given to reduce our emissions by 60% by 2030, we are moving in the right direction. So that's all from me briefly, what I have shared and what initiatives we have taken, and any specific questions I am happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Venkatra. Very impressive numbers that you are showing. Very interesting, very impressive. So I would now like to invite Mr. Ravi Shankar to give his perspective of what activities he is doing in his organization, what initiatives, and what is his strategy going forward for the carbon reduction, carbon neutralization.
Thank you. Good evening to all. So I do not have a presentation. I would just like to share with you as an auto component manufacturer. We are predominantly a a tier 2 company. We are a forging, hardcore manufacturing forging company. So I would like to share with you what are the things what we have done in our manufacturing setup, and also from a product standpoint. For manufacturing setup, very similar to the earlier speaker. So what we have done is that we have conducted we conduct energy audits and air audits every year to ensure that we are improving the efficiency. Similarly, what we have done is that any new investment, we are looking for highly energy efficient equipments. So in our process, we do a lot of heat treatment and other heat, where and all we have converted most of our equipment from oil to electricity based heating as well as furnaces. And similarly, in the logistics side, we have also do a lot of we do a lot of milk run, so that to ensure that we can have an optimized logistic chain to milk run and collect from vendors, so that we can minimize the amount of fuel being spent. Other than that, we also use we have done a lot of solar rooftop for our factory, so that we are utilizing a lot of solar power. Other than that, we have also have a solar plant outside, offsite. We have both wind and solar plants, from which we generate almost 50 to 60% of our consumption is generated through renewable, through wind and solar. So that that is something that we are dedicated to do in moving forward also. And this ESG requirement, we are predominantly tier 2. In some cases, we are also tier 1. So this ESG requirement is no longer an option; it's a mandatory requirement. It is tied to further sourcing. So we need to pass ESG requirement if we have to bid for new business. So I think it is coming down the value chain. It used to be earlier only for tier 1, now tier 2 also. There's a lot of audits happening, and we need to we need to fill in the ESG section to be eligible for future business awards. So I think the push is there in the right direction. From a product standpoint, we are concentrating more on aluminum. So we see that as an opportunity, both lightweighting for ICE applications, and when we move to EV, lighter material have to offset the weight of the batteries that are going to be used. So aluminum, of course, lightweighting is one, and the other most important thing about aluminum is 100% recyclable. So so we are concentrating a lot on aluminum. We have put in an exclusive plant to develop aluminum forgings, which will replace steel components as well as cast iron applications, so that in the future we can also be a part of lightweighting. We see this lot of opportunities in the export market already. In Europe and North America, we are already delivering a lot of aluminum parts, and we expect that this trend will very soon come to India with the emphasis on lightweighting and EV. So these are all the small things as a core manufacturing company that we have taken for maintaining the carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi Shankar. So very interesting session today. I would say we have seen all aspects. We saw the global, the market numbers, India market numbers, how the automotive is going to grow, and 8 or 10% of the GDP means about $800 million of if it's 8 trillion. So it's a huge number. So a lot of opportunity. But I also see that there is a challenges, because there's a challenge coming from electrification. There's a challenge coming from carbon neutrality, and legislation is also moving in that direction. So there will be some shift of some of the components, which will undergo some basic structural shift. Some components probably will become obsolete, and new technologies, new components will become more relevant in the coming years. But one thing is for sure, that the change is happening very fast. So I think it is very interesting how different companies are trying to cope up with this challenge. On the fueling side, we heard Dr. Bragg. We saw on the manufacturing side, on the product design side, investments into the new technologies like aluminum forging. Sorry, very interesting. So now I'd like to throw the session open for any questions if you have from the speakers. So please come forward and then we can answer those questions. And Brad, are you on the line or call?
Yes, I'm online.
Okay, yeah. Any questions anybody has, please come on. You're talking in India? In India, sir. Hydrogen vehicles. So Brad, the question is, when do you think the hydrogen vehicles will get introduced in the Indian market?
Well, you know, the technology is being developed now. I think the win, if I were to look at, say that how would we get those fuels on, say, a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, I think you're talking two-wheeler, three-wheeler. I think it's primarily going to show up in the three-wheeler first. When probably, I mean, the demonstrations are ongoing right now, actually, but I think in terms of the market, maybe within 5 years, this would be a 2028 kind of timing for hydrogen. Hydrogen requires both the technology on the application itself, but also requires the infrastructure for refueling. And so I think the infrastructure needs to be there. And I think India starts out with a good way. There are a number of hydrogen refueling stations, not many in India. They'll continue to grow, similar to North America. If you were to ask me that question in North America a year ago, is completely different than the answer I have today. A year ago, essentially, there was maybe 3 hydrogen stations in Los Angeles and 1 in New York. Today, there's a whole number of both eastboard and westboard fueling stations for hydrogen, and several of them in the Midwest today in just 1 year, due to the hydrogen hub work for the Infrastructure Act. I think that probably will still occur something similar in India. I think the technology, though, will needed probably around, it's being developed now, but probably for sale, maybe 3 to 5 years.
Interestingly, if you see in India, different auto manufacturers are taking a slightly different approach to the future. But I know for sure Honda is much more aggressive on introducing hydrogen-powered cars. So you will probably see soon from Honda. And Toyota, of course, is more on the hybrid side, as you know, than all the Prius and other vehicles. But Honda is taking its bet more on the hydrogen. And I mean, but it's an approach. It's difficult to answer the question. For example, we are working on a project with Indian Railways. They want to convert all the diesel locomotives to DME. So they have taken an approach on DME. So it is interesting. So probably, you know, it will settle down. But looks like, as you're rightly pointing out, is the hydrogen is going to be one of the key fueling strategies in addition to the battery for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, question to Mr. Ravi Shankar and Mr. Venkatramani. So like for the product, there are regulations for emissions to curtail down the emission and modify the product to reduce the carbon footprint. And whether there are some regulation in the process also from Government of India or something, which is trying to reduce this process-related carbon intrusion.
Oh, surely. I mean, if you look at the TNPCB norms, we are in Tamil Nadu, let us talk about TNPCB norms. They have a very clear norm about NOx, ppm level, everything. These things are monitored every month. Every month, each manufacturing industry, if it is there are 3 categories TNPCB defines industry, the red, orange and green. If you are in red or orange, every month there need to be a survey for both air pollution and water pollution need to be done. These data need to be submitted to TNPCB. They come once in a year. They come for an audit. We have to pay the fees to them to come for the audit. They come, they check it. The latest big initiative taken and tough initiative was something like 50% reduction of specific matter ppm levels and NOx from the diesel generators. All the companies are using captive generator. There is no technology available. That is where it started in 2019-20. It's like a do or die. That's the situation. and you go to the engine manufacturer who gave you the captive generator, like Caterpillar, they say that you tell that this kind of requirement does not hold good for generator. What they have asked is obnoxious. It doesn't work. So where will you go? Manufacturer tells it is not feasible. Government banks saying that I want it. But technology emerged. There are a few IITians, young people, they have come out with technologies we have implemented. In a very tough time during the COVID time, we implemented it. And we are successful. We have 70% reduction in the specific emissions which are coming out of the stack. 70%.
What have you done on the Jensen? It's very interesting.
We can speak offline. This is something like a filtration technique. So when the generator stack which comes out, there is a buffer zone creates. They use membranes. Not the water scrubber old technology, but these are membranes, a different kind of membranes where a huge amount of heat is generated to burn the thing.
Okay, we have that.
Some of the boys in the IIT, they come out with this technology. So India comes out of problems successfully on its own. Believe.
Yeah. Very interesting. Any other question, please?
I come from Coimbatore, where there are a lot of auto component manufacturers, tier 2, 1, and so on. So one question I have is, what kind of guidance is available for small to medium kind of organizations to understand this change in direction, and how can they use their existing facilities and infrastructure to future-proof their business?
What I would say is this is more related to customer specific, your customers. Who are your customers? Who is the tier 1? If you are in tier 2, who is the tier 1? So it is the supply chain, the technology available, requirements. Because automotive is purely depending on what the end customer is looking at. What is the OEM looking at it? Then we change our technology, our manufacturing process, everything to suit that. So that is where you need to knock the door. You need to knock the door of your tier 1 or even the OEM, saying that I am in your supply chain. Tell me what is your vision for the next 5 years. Many of the companies, even we are sometimes tier 1, sometimes tier 2, we knock the door of customers and say, give me your strategic plan. What is that you are looking at? That's the way to go.
I think there are a lot of agencies which do energy audits and air audits. Maybe that may be a starting point. They can do an assessment of your company, and they can make recommendations. Maybe everything may not be practically feasible, but I think that may be a starting point. I know bigger organizations like CAA have their own energy audit. I'm sure there must be other associations also which have experts who can start. I think that may be a good starting point for a MSME or a SME to start.
Correct, very nice.
Yeah, so a question from Mr. Ravi Shankar. So you say your company switched to an aluminium-based source for your raw materials in your supply chain. Now, one problem that arises from that is from the mining of bauxite, which in India is known to have many issues with reference to ESG. So how is your company ensuring that sustainable practices are being met while you're sourcing bauxite and aluminium as part of your supply chain?
Yeah, I think to be honest, our size of company and being a tier 2, we don't do so much of backward. No, I think the honest answer is that we are looking at ESG at our level. We are not required to go back into the because the companies are such huge corporations. I don't think we would have any say in that. So we procure from big companies like Hindalco or other companies, and I guess we do not go to that level. We are looking at more from what we can control, which is basically, we try to design along with our customers wherever we could convert parts into aluminum for lightweighting and for, as I said, aluminum is 100% recyclable, so over the long run it will help. But we do not have the capability to go to the backward level.
Probably I'll add. Most of the bauxite mining in India is done by the government companies. Hindalco is the main player. There are no much of choices that are available, and in that situation, no, as a supplier, we won't be able to conduct audit on them, especially on a government organization. And that is one spot to be noted when we are talking about bauxite.
But I would like to add that aluminium is a very unique product where people don't use 100% virgin aluminium.
Yep.
There's a lot of recyclable. So when you use recyclable, you are obviously saving all that bauxite, conversion process. So that helps the environment, obviously. So it's a very unique metal. You can go up to, I know some product categories, they use almost 100%. 70%, 80%. So there is no other product which uses so much of, recycles the material. Okay. Any other question? All right, then I'll close the session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brad. Thank you here, speakers, and it was a very
Thank you very
informative
much.
session.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Yeah. Yeah, we'll present the mementos. Thank you. Sorry, Brad, we'll courier your memento.
Ensuring that sustainable practices are being met in while you're sourcing bauxite and aluminium as part of your supply chain?
Yeah, I think to be honest, our size of company and being a tier 2, we don't do so much of backward. No, I think the honest answer is that we are looking at ESG at our level. We are not required to go back into the because the companies are such huge corporations. I don't think we would have any say in that. So we procure from big companies like Hindalco or other companies, and I guess we do not go to that level. We are looking at more from what we can control, which is basically, we try to design along with our customers wherever we could convert parts into aluminum for lightweighting and for, as I said, aluminum is 100% recyclable, so over the long run it will help. But we do not have the capability to go to the backward level.
Probably I'll add. Most of the bauxite mining in India is done by the government companies. Hindalco is the main player. There are no much of choices that are available, and in that situation, as a supplier, we won't be able to conduct audit on them, especially on a government organization. And that is one spot to be noted when we are talking about bauxite.
But I would like to add that aluminium is a very unique product where people don't use 100% virgin aluminium.
Yep.
There's a lot of recyclable. So when you use recyclable, you are obviously saving all that bauxite, conversion process. So that helps the environment, obviously. So it's a very unique metal. You can go up to, I know some product categories they use almost 100%. 70%, 80%. Yeah, so there is no other product which uses so much of, recycles the material. Okay. Any other question? All right, then I'll close the session. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brad. Thank you here, speakers, and it was a very
Thank you very
informative
much.
session.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. Yeah. Yeah, we'll present the mementos. Thank you. Sorry, Brad, we'll courier your memento.
Moderate.